initiatives, and applied in various other contexts. Our facilitator for this session is Mr. Apollos Nwafo. Apollos Nwafo is the Pan-African Director of Oxfam International, one of our major partners in putting together this year's high-level dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, shall we put our hands together as I welcome Mr. Apollos Nwafo. Our lead presenter, he is our host in the middle. Yes. He's our host and the Director General of the Directorate on Corruption and Economic Crime. And I use this opportunity to say a very big thank you to him and his team for all the support we have received. Let's put our hands together for Mr. Victor Bruno Paledi, the Director General of the DCEC. And our discussants for this session would be, I will start with Ms. Crystal Simeoni, Head of Advocacy and Economic Justice Lead at FEMNET. FEMNET is a leading Pan-African feminist organization working on issues of women's participation in political, economic, and social spaces. Let's put our hands together for Ms. Simeoni. Last but not the least, we would like to always say this. In his former life as the head of the governance program in UNDP, was very instrumental to the first convening of this high-level dialogue 7 years ago, and subsequently for several years until he then moved into private practice as the founder and executive director of UHAI Africa Group, Mr. Brian Kagoro. Let's put our hands together for them. At this point, I would like to hand over to Mr. Apollos Nwafo, who would moderate this session. Mr. Apollos.
Right. Thank you, Ibrahim, and welcome, everyone. I think what's important this morning is actually to understand from a case study approach what a country has done to fight corruption and what we can learn from it, but also to practically understand what are the underlying causes of corruption within the continent, what are the issues we face, and why it still persists. Earlier on this morning, the session was discussing some of the issues, and people were raising issues around institutions, but more importantly, the fact that people make institutions. We'll hear this case study, we will understand it, we'll see the interactions between people and institutions, and as well as understand where the gaps are to be able to forge a way forward for us who actually make decisions on policy, on programs, but as well as what the political decisions that are required to be able to move things forward in the continent. So we'll welcome Victor Paledi, the Director for the Anti-Corruption Agency in Botswana, to make his presentation. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think like those who spoke before me, let me also say I protocol observed. And before maybe I start my presentation, I think there are two things that I want to say. First of all, I'm the organizer. And when you are organizing an international conference and the head of the state is the one who's actually going to open it, you get stressed, you don't sleep at night because you want to say, how are people being handled at the airport? Are their visas okay? Because the president is going to open, and then you know how you don't want to be just as a failure. So I'm just coming to this presentation very, very dry. But maybe to actually make sure that I take care of that so that we don't be seen as not being serious at DCEC. I became emotionally intelligent. Then I invited two former directors of DCEC because I'm only 12 months in the post. I'm a former police officer. I was the Deputy Inspector General of the Botswana Police. So I'm only 12 months. So what I did, I called Mayor Timon Katlolo, who's here. He's the former director of DCEC. And I also invited Menu Nusra, who I immediately took after the leadership of DCEC. So if anything that you want to ask about them or the content, if mine is shallow, I think they'll be given an opportunity to say something during the comments. Ladies and gentlemen, I think a lot have been said yesterday and today. And if you look into the heads of the arguments, you'll see that the theme that repeats it's almost basically the same. So it's very, very difficult to come after giants like John. I met John in Uganda, and I didn't raise my hands during the discussion because I knew I was going to have an opportunity to be at the podium. But I think the kind of issues that he raises, I really entirely agree with him. And this is basically what I'm going to be talking about, the Botswana, or the case of Botswana, because it's the issue of making sure that the very, very same informal institutions that we have, we actually take advantage of them. And this is what we did. And I think even the president yesterday mentioned the Khotla system, which predates the French Revolution. Those are the things that actually make the Botswana situation very, very unique. So thank you so much, John, for having laid the background for me, because basically that's what we are going to, I'm going to be, my presentation is going to be centered around. And the second one, I think, because I have soldiers as friends, they taught me something. They say war is an act of will directed towards living, breathing entities that react. And likewise, communication is an act of will directed towards living, breathing entities. Because there are a lot of smart people in this house. I've decided to make my presentation very, very simple. I'm not going to be using political economy, tangents. I'm just going to be telling you the very simplistic things that we do in this country. It will sound boring and simple, but the reason why it succeeds is because the people of Botswana understand the language when we talk about corruption. So this is how we've actually made to simplify it. And this is one of the key issues that I want this august audience to actually understand, that let's change the language of anti-corruption to the people so that they actually understand. Because if you don't want, the people who are corruptors or who are corrupt, they're actually using this fissure or this gap between the way we communicate to actually turn it against. Of recent in Botswana, there have been a multi-million-dollar cases that we've actually been chasing around. And guess what? The first thing that they do, they will target the agents. So they will try to look into me, my previous things, what did I do? And because people understand, they start to realize that this is not true. One of the things that they said is that, oh, this is Paledi, was he with the police? This is the guy who came up with flagging of motor vehicles. Flagging, we flag vehicles in this country, so that when you try to go to the Minister of Transport to pay, they say you have to pay your fine, because it's expensive to follow people around. And I was behind that strategy. But they put it in the paper as if I'm the one who came up with it. But when people know that in this country I don't make laws, they understand and they want to link it with the current cases. So what I'm trying to say is that the public must actually understand what are the issues. Otherwise, anti-corruption agencies are going to be punished for their efforts. You become a victim of your efforts. Yeah, but let the slides roll. I've already said about this. We are an agency that actually fights corruption. And my staff officer is the one who put my picture there. But I tell most of the time, don't put it there. The presentation is not about me, but at least they put the building now. That's DCC headquarters. And down there is our logo. It's a spider. We in Botswana acknowledge that corruption is so complex like a spider web. If you don't accept the complexity, try to simplify it, there's no way you can win the fight against corruption. The first rule is understand that corruption is complex. If you simplify it, it will be difficult. You can't come here for 3 days and say, I'm going to solve in 3 days a 30-year problem. No, it's systemic, it takes a longer time, and it will also take a longer time to actually deal with it. Those are the key factors that we realize in this country. Yeah. And historically, I think we've already talked about this thing, but I think the gentleman from Sierra Leone who was a discussant here said it in very simple terms. I mean, if you look at the issue of corruption, it's something that actually comes long way back, because he said it's part and parcel of human nature. And it is behavior that we actually need to understand. And if you look at the history books, you will understand that even the times of Pythagoras, the times of Aristotle, corruption was still there. And the things that were actually perpetuating corruption was the issue of inequality in societies. So because we've realized this thing, in Botswana, we historically, we were like, But I'm not want to be quoted to say that all the efforts that we make in Botswana are based on luck. But luck is a factor in our approach towards corruption. We, as you all know, we're a British colony, and when John Cecil Rhodes from Cape to Cairo established the route, it was purely for trade route, and Botswana was just a pass-through. And in their own classification, the British saw Botswana as a desert, so with nothing much to have for it. So we are not really very good, very much more intelligent than the other African states, but it was our colonial history that actually made things easier for us. So they literally handed independence to us. We didn't have to fight for independence. They said, no, take this desert if you want it. And fortunately enough, immediately when they left, we discovered the diamonds. And by the time they tried to come back, we already had frameworks and infrastructures. And it also influenced the culture and the belief system in the country. Because we were a desert, we had nothing. At independence, we had only 5 kilometers of tarred road, 1966. So now when suddenly you have diamonds, you have to be careful about it. It's human nature. When you come from a very disadvantaged family and you buy your car, I don't think you are going to spin it around to demonstrate. You take care of it. So this also influenced our policies. And it's the historical background. That's why I want to say, to answer the question, the frequently asked question, what are you doing in Botswana that we don't do? No, it's not that we are better off in terms of that, but it's also the culture and the history that actually. But the thing that I want you to understand is, it was after the attainment of this wealth that now we set in systems to actually protect it. And corruption, I think you've already heard more about what corruption can do. You know, we can skip that one. The effects of corruption, we also know the effects of corruption is so painful because it has been said many times how rich we are as a continent. You heard yesterday the speakers when they said we don't even need direct foreign aid. We don't need aid that actually comes from even investment. So we can use that 50 billion for ourselves. And to build more schools, better roads. And we can also now go to our approach. I think that our approach in this country, corruption prevention is the spear of the DCEC. And we say it's the spear because from my experience, once you've traced the illicit financial flows, you connect them to somebody else, to some political exposed persons, and you try to go to court. These guys will fight with everything that they will have. They will use several media platforms to actually paint you as a devil, witch hunting. They've got the best lawyers and they are advocates. They carry very big briefcases. You are just intimidated by the briefcase before you even go to court. So that's how powerful and how connected it is. And it's not surprising. They are good, they're intelligent normally. That's why they are able to pull out this thing. It's not an average guy who does grand corruption. It's the persons who have the connections and the knowledge to do that. And they know that once they have it, it's also power. They don't only do that. They also have other transnational organized crimes who they utilize to hide their money. Because like somebody said, corruption is a crime. It does not only stop there, it also facilitates violent crimes because these guys will stop at nothing to protect their wealth. So even those who they have not even asked help from will attack you because they understand the channels. They understand that a big river is filled by tributaries. So with transnational organized crime, so the issue that I want you to actually link and understand is the issue of understanding other social ills and linking them to corruption. Because one of the things that makes us not actually attend corruption in the fullest and the most effective way is, like right now, this is an anti-corruption workshop. But as we speak right now, somewhere in the world, there is chlorofluorocarbons, global warming. There is the issue of energy. There is the issue of how do we control waste that is created. You'll be surprised how much humans create waste. And it actually chokes us, our own waste. How do we actually control waste? I was seeing in a magazine in one country where they've got so much that they don't know where to put the dead. And corruption was there because the guy who was given the money to collect the rubbish disappeared with the money. So I think it is our ability to understand complexity and links all these other social ills to corruption that can actually inform our interventions in fighting corruption. And the second one is public education, which is very good. I've already talked about public education in my introduction. That is very, very critical for us to actually, so not just public education, it must be targeted so that all different forms of people actually understand. But it's not open, and it must be packaged in such a way that people can actually understand and read. Because sometimes when you come up with these flyers and complaints, people look at them and just throw them. You look at the issue of the fight against HIV/AIDS, that people say, no, this is the message we've heard over and over, so what? So I think those are the things that you must also factor in your public education. And investigation, well, investigation is one of the things that we use in Botswana, but like I said, to me, it's like it's like campaigns after election, because once they've taken the goods, they don't want to return them back. So we need to actually prevent. Prevention for me is the key. And there's the issue of the laws. We've already talked a lot about the laws, the asset forfeiture. And in this case, like issue of asset forfeiture, we need to retrain the whole structure, the whole machinery of fighting corruption. Even the judges, all the lawyers, the investigators, because they might have qualifications in law, but if they don't understand the object of asset, because the whole intention behind it is to say, you are 37 years old, and you have over $100 million in your pocket, and you are in an African country that is poor, doesn't have schools. How do you have so much money when you are 37 years old? Explain to us. The burden is on them. But when you go to court, and then they just say they really don't understand what you are saying, and they give him back the money, it defeats the whole purpose. So I think we need to understand how transnational organized crime works, because they look at our inability to communicate with each other. What are we doing right in Botswana? You must tell me, my brother, because I'm so passionate about this subject. I can talk the whole day. So if you want to stop me, you can stop me. The others, I'll respond when they ask the questions. Do I still have time? Okay. Yeah, so he's telling me I have a lot of time. It's I'll just take 2 minutes and I'll finish. The issue is what are we doing right? I think from the onset, the lady and the gentleman that I pointed here to them were very smart enough. So I'm actually riding on the shoulders of who came before me. They realized that it is very, very critical. But it didn't start with them. It started when we started our government in '66 to mainstream issues of governance and accountability into the ministries and the institutions. So the DPP, Ombudsman, Parliament, the police, FIA stands for Financial Intelligence Agency, and other security agencies, and the Accountant General. We work hand in hand. When I start a corruption case, maybe it starts with what we call suspicious transactions. We spot them, and then we say, where does this money come from? We follow them. So it's like a conduit. There's like a pipe. They pass it to me. And from this way, I now look at which is the affected ministry. And then I also engage the Accountant General. From the onset, before we actually do. But in the meantime, we also try to protect even the suspects because of weaponization. People have talked about the weaponization, about corruption. So we don't want to fall into a trap where suddenly now we've actually used our agency to actually fight other people's wars. So what we do, we keep it a secret. That's why the people in Botswana always say, you DCC people, you don't talk about this, and who are you? When are you giving this person a charge sheet? When are you taking them to God? You are taking too long. And my answer to them is that, no, but we also have to protect our suspects because we don't really know that this is cooked or this is real. And it takes a long time, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, to investigate a corruption matter. It takes long because there's no single offense that is called corruption. It is the issue of money laundering. It is the issue of abuse of office. It is the issue of conflict of interest. And for you to say truly there is conflict of interest, you need to be going to people, interviewing people, going across countries to take statements so that you link the funds or the illicit funds to this other kind of people. And because they are smart, they will distance themselves from the actual evidence of actually being connected. The only hope that we have and believe is that anything that can be stolen can also be traced. But they try by all means to layer, and distance themselves from the man. They are now putting the money in the banks now. They no longer put it in the bank because they know the first thing that we do, we go to the bank. So they are getting smarter and smarter. That is the complexity that I was actually talking about, that we mustn't take corruption for granted and investigation. Those are the realities. And because of this thing, we were able to actually now fill up the gaps. And this is also what we do. I do what is called a prosecutor-led investigation, so that when we build up towards the case, we can stop and say, look we are just chasing ghosts. If you take this matter to court, you don't have effect. But when we have the prosecutor along from the onset with DPP, it actually helps to build up the case, because that's what you need to do. And then we also join hands with the community to actually fight these things, and especially on the international front, we engage we do our international obligations. Locally, we've set up anti-corruption into ministries. We've mainstreamed corruption into all the ministries in this country. Each and every ministry has a unit that specifically deals with anti-corruption. That's what they do. It's a prevention mechanism. And when there is a case, they always refer the case for us for investigation. They belong to the ministry. They are not necessarily part of this. They are not an extension of the DCEC, but they work for the minister. We are also in the process of infusing anti-corruption as a subject in schools curricula to teach children about the effects of corruption and from a very, very young age. We have corruption clubs at high schools, and we hold periodic debates on corruption related subjects. Because corruption, like people were saying, is a very, very touchy and iffy subject. So we believe, and we strongly believe, that in this country, we must openly and freely speak about corruption. And that's one of the things that, even though my job is very difficult, but one thing that I like about this country is that everyone in this country, you don't even have to look behind your shoulder, whether the minister is here or the minister is not here to talk about corruption. You name names, you talk about corruption. For us, it's a plus. We don't talk about corruption in hushed tones. We talk about it, and people tell me in my face that I'm toothless. I chase small fish instead of big fish. And it also makes me to actually look at my strategy. Are these people telling the truth? Because they're not afraid. People in Botswana, they come to the agents, they say, no, you are useless. You only chase small guys. But my answer to them is that when you have 3 big fish and we have a ton full of small fish, the ton is much more heavier than this kind of. That's how economies actually, finances disappear. So we don't care. We chase both big fish and small fish. And if small fish can stop, at least now we'll have only big fish to deal with. And maybe the living standards of people like in Asia will go up, because there will be less money going out so that we can build more roads and more things. So this is what I tell them. Ladies and gentlemen, I still have a lot to say, but the others I will be just stating the obvious. So we tend to simplify the fight against corruption. And like others have said, we've already started in Botswana to take the war to the people, so that the people themselves, because they are the ones who carry the power of the ballot. They control it. So we tell them, ask your leaders to account. And I'm safe in this country. I know that I will not be called to any office to be saying I was discussing corruption even at the bar. We discuss it at the bar. So nobody can call me and say, why were you talking about these things? No. So long as we don't name names before the courts take their course, and we don't prejudice other people, we can talk about corruption. And the rating of Transparency International does not necessarily mean that there's no corruption in Botswana. It is there. The only thing that we have an advantage of is our court system, that like the president meant, and the courts and the infrastructure. Because it's easy to get people who steal in this country, because there are traces and we can take them to court. The courts are functioning and they're willing to take the cases. DCC is also willing to investigate. We investigate everything. To an extent that some of them we refer them. Some we refer to clear a case, we refer them to the police. Others we take them to the ombudsman, because people still have the trust. On average, we receive about on weekly, I think it's about 10, 15. So on average in a month at DCC, we receive close to 200 cases. But we sift through them. We will find that others are clear corruption cases, because we use the SECA in our evaluation to see if there's corruption here. Others we refer them. So it means the people still have confidence in us. They can come and actually report corruption. And this is, to us, this is a strength, even though we don't have we don't move at the speed that they wish, but we still do receive reports. With those few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Victor. Very interesting presentation, and I like some of your final words around the fact that we need to take the war on corruption to the people, because the people have the power. And I think the question is, one of the questions around that will be, how do we get the people who have the power, and what kind of power do the people have to be able to fight corruption? I think just to echo some of your words around the fact that the public must understand the war against corruption, or else as an anti-corruption agency, you're likely to become the victim of your own efforts. You know, it would be good to understand that further. The fact that we do not have what a one single offense that is called corruption. So I like your point on the fact that corruption could be from money laundering to sexual harassment to conflict of interest to nepotism, you know. And, you know, there's been questions around where do we draw the line on what is corruption and what is not. We know in some countries where there's the issue of, well, this is lobbying and this is getting support for my issue. It's not corruption. Where's the line? You know. And then there's also the fact that we need to work with other agencies. I like your case study where you talked about working with the police, the ombudsman, you know, the financial intelligence unit, you know, and others. And then you talked about how we fight corruption around having anti-corruption units within the ministries, and which is really very important. I know some countries who have done that. But, you know, there was also the question is that, are we not, you know, wasting money, having too many government departments and units? For example, so what then is the role of the internal auditor in that ministry if we then have an anti-corruption unit and then you have the auditor's office? Should the auditor not be able to identify possible, you know, cases of suspicion of fraud or corruption or whatever, and then ensure that that's reported to probably your agency? So I think those are some questions. And then there's also the issue of looking at laws and policies as well as targeted public education and also ensuring that from the school age we begin to talk about corruption, like corruption clubs in schools. I have been a beneficiary of that when I was a student also. And finally is around the fact that your case study talked a lot about the fact that you seem to be well supported within the government. So what does political backing mean for you? You know, I think those are some of the issues that, you know, I'd like Brian and Crystal to speak to. So maybe I'll ask Crystal to speak first for 5 minutes, and then Brian, and then we can then have some further discussion. And please, if you do have your questions, start noting them down. I will encourage you to please go straight to the point. Yeah, you don't need to beat about the bush before you ask your question. And if you have a comment, please try and be as concise as possible and not leaving any important thing out. Okay? Crystal? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Crystal Simeoni. I work with Femnet, which is one of Africa's largest Pan-African women's rights network. So just for clarity, I speak from a Pan-African feminist lens, and that'll inform my remarks and everything I say. So thank you for the presentation. It's such an honor to be in Botswana, coming from Kenya, where we're grappling with corruption in ways that we haven't done in the past. As I was listening, a few things came to mind, and I wonder about the changing face of corruption. And corruption seems to be taking an ever international dimension. It's transbordery, it cuts across continents, across countries, and it seems that Botswana has very good models of fighting the corruption scourge here within the confines of your borders. But I'm wondering what that looks like as we go broader. It also links to linking struggles. So we've heard a lot about illicit financial flows, and I think the latest figures are that Africa loses $100 billion annually through illicit financial those. The high-level panel puts only 5% as leakages through corruption and 65% through multinational activity and commercial activity, much of which comes with multinational corporations. Now, with the growing advent of PPPs and their financialization of our development, with the increasing inclusion of private sector partners in our spaces, providing development infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools, I wonder what that looks like when you interface it with corruption and then further interact it with women's rights. So I'll give you an example. Kenya has 2.7 per 10,000 clinicians. That's our Kenyan statistic. And so as my old boss, John Githongo, says, we constantly look to private solutions for public problems because public hospitals have been sort of attacked by corruption, and it's find the quality of healthcare that you seem to find. This year, our taxes went up, and with private sector inclusion, section in a private hospital has gone up to $2,000. And so when you're talking about access and access for all, including women who are always at the bottom when we count, what does that look like in the realm of PPPs, international corruption channels, spaces of conflict like South Sudan, who a lot of their public funds end up in Kenya and Uganda, yet they have 90% of their women who cannot read and write, and what does that mean for them? And so the models in Botswana, how can we broaden them to include an international dimension, but also take into consideration in some of our countries that we can't copy and paste. And so I noticed I might be the youngest person on this panel and the only one with a laptop. And so we tend to go onto the streets of social media, and in countries like Uganda, where they're taxing bloggers, they're taxing social media, what does it mean for the fight? And what does it mean for a country who says the political will is there, yet clamps down on avenues that are so needed in the fight against corruption? John this morning talked about trust and confidence in leaders, and the African Union is one of those leaders on the continent. This month, the scandal on sexual harassment came out with 88 women, young women coming up and saying they have been offered sex for jobs. The African Union has no sexual harassment policy as one of the leading Pan-African organizations. They need to be leading by example. And so it brings into question the politics of language and how do we define corruption, and knowing that it's not just monetary, but it manifests in different ways. Sexual harassment is one of the biggest ways that women experience corruption, and a lot of women experience corruption every single day of their lives, from trying to access water in Kisumu, where they have to provide sex for water or sex for fish, from trying to get their children into schools, from trying to access quality healthcare. So we really need to be asking deeper questions, and deeper questions outside of the realm of whether men are more corrupt than women. We need to understand corruption as an output of a power imbalance and a skewed power system, and then only then will we be able to fight corruption in a way that includes all of us and not just have women as an annex or mainstreamed in the conversation as a footnote, but really holistically begin to ask these deeper questions that allow for all of us to be at this table. We often victimize women, and victims are never asked for solutions. And so until we change power structures to have women at those tables, to have them in spaces of power and contributing in a meaningful way, I think is only when we begin to solve things.
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you. Very, very helpful points. And I like your last point on the fact that corruption is an output of power imbalance. Yeah? I'll quote you on that on Twitter. And we need to, so if we can change the power structure, then we probably can address corruption. And I think maybe we need to understand what those deeper questions that needs to be asked. You know, what are these deeper questions, and how do we ensure that those questions are helping us to unpack, but as well as address the challenge of corruption in our countries? Brian?
Thank you, Chair. I come to the conversation on corruption with joy, and it sounds cynical because, you know, our thieves have become Pan-Africanists. You know, before they used to steal and send money to Switzerland. Now you steal in Sudan, send it to Kenya, and so they've become developmental and Pan-Africanist. And part of the challenge of Pan-Africanist thieves is the tenuous and intellectually quasi-awkward notion that corruption always undermines development. I think that we would be intellectually lazy to take that classical approach. Much of the pillaging is now manifesting as high-rise buildings, restaurants, and other places that the middle class goes to. And that's an important place to start because I think you said, Director, that it is complex, systemic, and historical. And that ending it depends in part on luck and also setting up systems. I wanted to distinguish this conversation from a false conversation. A false conversation treats the taking of money as corruption, the taking of land as corruption. And that's a manifestation of corruptness. Corruption is the mental condition, the ethical and moral condition that pre-exists and enables somebody to take money that is not due to them. Because if all we are fighting is people taking money, then we are only tinkering. That's 10% of corruption. And in a continent where the fixation has been about material resources, there is a fixation in measuring money taken. And so when you look at forms that are now even called social forms of corruption, sex for jobs, in Botswana, one of the biggest problems that you have is nepotism. So the global rankings, which is global capital, says Botswana is not corrupt because they are not going to ask you for a bribe. You can come and set up your extractive thing here. But the problem you're likely to encounter in Botswana is nepotism. Right? And that is all our societies. John Githongo began speaking to this thing. Did we misdefine corruption and therefore are likely to be perpetually called corrupt? In the US, when you're elected president, you come with your cousins, your nephews, your nieces. Trump came into the State House with his daughter, son-in-law, and on and so on. In Africa, that would have been grand corruption. We would have actually instituted 10 commissions of inquiry into that grand corruption. In the US system, they excluded that kind of action from corruption based on their culture of how they do governance. We, unfortunately, have not, to go back to what John Githongo was saying, we are very familiar, clan-based, sometimes ethnic, and so on and so forth. We have not taken account of that factor in the design of our governance modalities and framework. So in essence, what is corrupt for us is not corrupt in another context. So we will never be uncorrupt because we have essentially criminalized conduct that's natural to ourselves. In Western society, Chair, when you go for dinner, you don't go empty-handed, you carry a bottle of wine. That would be a grand act of corruption where I come from. Right? Why are you bribing the host before you get the dinner? So construction of what is corrupt or not corrupt is something we are not contesting, but we need to define it so that we don't end up in perpetual conversation about thieving African elites who are stealing, according to the Mbeki report, only 6% of what's being stolen from the continent. When we begin to define illicit financial flows as corruption, we are making it sound so sanitized. It is grand larceny, it is theft. It is a crime against humanity. It is not corruption. Illicit financial flows are a designed, deliberate sabotage of the potential of Africa to grow, largely transacted by outsiders. So don't equate that to a policeman getting a bribe, for goodness sake. Otherwise, we're having a false conversation. And we'll end up saying we have combated corruption. Chair, I know why you are only fighting carpenter, the small fish. That means your frying pan is small. It can't contain sharks and whales. And an anti-corruption commission by its very nature is not designed to curtail, contain, or persecute or prosecute a multinational corporation whose budget may be bigger than that of the country. So an anti-corruption commission is inadequate as an instrument for dealing with illicit financial flows and large-scale commercial contract-related corruption. So let's not sit in this conference and say anti-corruption commission is going to solve grand illicit financial flows. For goodness sake, the state budget, even in countries like Rwanda and Botswana, that you have as an anti-corruption commission cannot buy the suit of the head of the multinational corporation, right? The number of complexity of issues involved and the competencies amongst your officers, and you have some of the most competent officers, right? I don't want to talk about other anti-corruption commissions that are anti-corruption in name. They don't have the technical competence, they don't have the research competence, they don't have any other competence. In fact, they don't have the backing competence, never mind the biting competence, right? So if this is the problem, it's clear. I want to make the point, Chair, you cannot use the Anti-Corruption Commission to fight the level of crime that's stealing $50 billion from Africa annually. Let's start there, and this conference can have a proper conversation. Can you use an African court? Well, half our countries, their budgets are anchored on the CFI controlled from France, right? Some of those companies are very big in those northern economies. An African court would simply be to confirm in an Afro-pessimistic way that natives have a predisposition to take small amounts of money when large amounts of money are being taken from their countries by the northerners and others. It will simply confirm that your politicians like pittances, that they steal from their own healthcare and don't pay attention to those who are taking trillions, and Cameroon lost several trillions of dollars just over the last few years. We're not talking about bribes here. They are important to discuss, but that's an old conversation. We're talking about Africa's losses that are hemorrhaging not the present of Africa, but the future. Not enough only to build healthcare, enough to transform our countries from low income, from middle income to developed countries. Those who are stealing our development potential want us to focus on those who are stealing our healthcare. Now, my own sense is the carpenter is important to fry, our local politicians, but let's have a conversation about the global fight against grand corruption and sabotage of Africa. And this is why fundamentally how we deal with this at a global level is more important to me than spending time. I mean, how much are these people stealing? $10 million, $15 million. It's a lot of money to an ordinary villager. To the future of our economies, it is the folk in suits, and some of them don't wear suits anymore, who are taking billions in terms of plant life, taking billions in terms of innovations, taking billions that I am interested in. As a Pan-Africanist, I'm tired of the notion that blackness is equivalent to corruption and whiteness is innovation even when it steals. So, Chair, let me prepare to land by simply saying, we have adopted technicist ways of fighting corruption. Increase the technology, move to e-government, move to e-governance. That will only catch the state bureaucrat. It will not catch the private sector guy. How do we expand that technological reach so that we're able to catch those people who are doing insider trading? How do we expand the reach so that we're able to catch those people who are doing futures trading? They are busy dealing with raising prices of food we have not yet produced. We have taken political approaches to fighting corruption. Leadership, commitment, and courage. Yes, our leaders have commitment and courage, but even if they had commitment and courage without competence, it would not give us the result we are looking for. The third, the moral appeal. Look, in churches these days, they give testimonies about how God blessed them by changing rules. So we have corruption in the church, corruption in the mosque, corruption in the city, corruption elsewhere. You can't, as I learned in Nigeria, if you are a lizard in your own home, you can't be a crocodile elsewhere. So we have many lizards everywhere, and we expect that when we elect. Look, let me assure young Africans, even if you had a free and fair election that was not rigged or hijacked, na lizard, na lizard. do we build these cities glorious? When in building, the builder remains unbuilt. That means, Chair, we have not built an African who's conscious enough about this continent and its future. We have not built a leadership that sees Africa beyond 50 to 100 years. We have a continent that has no strategy for China, a continent that has no strategy for Iran, for Turkey, for Saudi Arabia, and yet all these have strategies for Africa. A people without a conscious understanding of the long-term future are likely to sell for a bowl of soup that future in exchange for immediate gain. They are likely to sit back and twiddle their fingers thinking we have stopped bribes, and yet we have not stopped the hemorrhage that is deeper. Our society is suffering from a cancer of a global nature. And Band-Aid. So let me shut up by saying, Chair, the mass movement approach. Chair, the state has been the site of accumulation in the West and in the South. And my suggestion is this. Until we change our notion of the state, it doesn't matter how much morality and ethics we teach. The nature of the state will determine the nature of the economy, the nature of politics we transact, and how we define corruption. If we want to start well, I love these UN conventions and AU conventions, but these will be implemented by a thing called the African state. And until we deal with that creature, we are overloading to deal with structural problems. We will end up politicizing the judiciary, judicializing politics. We'll end up politicizing and lawyerizing corruption and corrupting the lawyers. So let's deal with fundamentals. It's structural, and let's deal with the structure.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, this is yet another confirmation of how much we have learned from you over the years. I think I like quite a number of the things you've said. For us to look beyond what is under our nose and become more strategic. So we need to raise our heads and understand the broader political issues regarding corruption. Your point on the fact that the structure of our state determines the structure of the economy and, you know, the structure of how we engage and how we define corruption. So, I think I like the point that if you're a lizard in your house, you cannot be a crocodile outside. I will take that wisdom. That's African in its nature. Yeah. So I think it's important when you said that we need to build an African state. So one of the critical issues I was thinking about while we were speaking was the fact that maybe we are just a copy and paste of some external agenda. We need to build an African state that helps us understand, you know, what we are and what we consider as corruption and fight it. And the broader issues around IFF. You know, when you said that theft, that illicit financial flow is grand theft and not corruption. So my question would be, is theft a more grievous crime than corruption? And how would you, what's the line between the two? I think it's something I'd asked earlier. We now see that there are limitations with institutions. I mean, from what Victor was talking about, how he has to refer cases, you know, to other agencies. I think we've seen that in countries like Liberia, where the Anti-Corruption Agency has also had its own struggles, in Nigeria with ICPC and other countries. So I think it's to understand what are the limitations of these institutions and how do we overcome these limitations. We're going to take questions from the audience, but maybe I would like to ask Victor to respond to some of the critical issues that has been raised, and then we'll then take your questions and comments from the rest of us. And of course, Crystal, Brian, and Victor will be more than happy to respond. Please.
Thank you. I have to make a confession. I'm actually flabbergasted, taken aback by Brian. I think what you said is encouraging, but you understand how moderate we are in this country. We are, the way in which we approach things is we have a moderated approach. I can't speak the way you speak, but some of the frustrations that you've mentioned, as a practitioner, I deal with them almost on daily basis, especially the issue of budget. And I mean, how do you now protect, if for example, the budget of Botswana would be, for argument's sake, 8 billion, how do I now protect that budget with that kind of money? I think you don't have to be a mathematician or an economist to actually understand that, but it's simple common sense. But as you know how the Ministry of Finance does its budget, you know, it's the inputs and outputs that matters to them. Is my budget or over my dead body? That's how you do. And there are other things to actually contend with. The reason why I painted a picture of talking about corruption here, we have other social ills. I gave an example about the issue of global warming. I gave the issue of crime in general, not necessarily corruption, the issue of poverty. You link all these things together, it will now actually inform you how you can actually counter on this. But you have to go for parliament, for budget. Those are the things that you do. But one of the things that you are asking me, my brother, is the issue of that I've noted. I'll start with you, my sister. You were saying, how do you actually now take the Botswana model to make it global? I think I was very, very clear from the onset when I was painting the picture, because I really wanted to make sure that people understand that what we are doing or what the perception ratings that we are actually there does not necessarily mean that we are better than other people. It's much more complex. I said you can take some of the simplistic things I was talking about our approaches, our institutions, but don't cut and paste. Cut and customize. That's the only thing I can say. And then the other issue that you actually raised was the issue of how do we maybe in this country go out there to the international community and can say this is a model that we think we can actually give to people to actually operate. That's why I'm saying it's an issue of your background, your historical thing, and the complexities. I think that we are different as a people, and the practices that we do over a period of time, that makes people also understand. And it's an issue of also genuinely involving the public, not just telling them, but genuinely involving them and empowering them to actually do that. Because you're asking me, how do we empower the people? You can empower them by actually educating them and telling them the truth, that they've got the power of the vote. They can actually change the situation around them.
Thank you. Thank you, Victor. So we're going to take questions and comments. To my right, this one here. Yeah. Okay, so the gentleman here in front of us in blue, I think, 4. The lady in red waving your hand, 5. That one. Okay. How do I describe? Okay, so that gentleman waving your hand, you're number 6. The lady in yellow, you're number 7. Now we move to this side. This end. So, sir, you're number 8. The lady waving your hand, you're number 9. And the gentleman in pink, you're number 10. We'll stop there for now. I think we're gender balanced. Yep. So we'll start. Please.
Thank you very much.
Could you kindly say your name and where you work? Yeah? Okay. You don't need to describe what you do. Just tell us where you work.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. My name is Joanna Mamombe. I'm a member of parliament in Zimbabwe. I just want to thank Victor, Crystal, and Brian for the insightful presentations that they have just given us. My contribution is very brief. Because if we look at the topic, of this session, which says sustainable approaches to the fight against corruption. So also coming from the legislative board, my main concern is about the parliamentary oversight role or the contribution of our parliaments in the continent. To say that, yes, we are the policymakers and stuff like that, but I don't really seem to get that contribution in terms of giving an oversight to the issue of corruption in our countries. So if you can also elaborate and try to give strategies and mechanisms of how our parliament, starting from the Pan-African Parliament, going down to our country's parliaments, in terms of their contribution, how can they go about it? Because if, as Brian has rightly put it across, to say that sometimes we have very good policies, and some of these policies, even probably most of the parliamentarians, they can't even interpret them, they can't understand them, because we tend to go outside, maybe outside of our countries or outside the continent, to go and hire experts to come and formulate these policies for us, you know, to come and help us with these things. But at the end of the day, we don't have the deep understanding of this law in terms of what they mean to us. So we need to kind of like simplify these things so that they resonate with our countries, they also resonate with the context that we are operating on. So I also want to get from the panelists, how can we do this in our countries, particularly focusing on our parliaments? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2, please.
Thank you. My name is Kagwe, and I work with IGAD. I just had 2 short questions. The first one was that when we...
Apologies.
Yes.
I mean, not just for me, for the audience. Could you just, explain the acronym? What's IGAD?
IGAD is one of the regional economic communities of the African Union. It stands for the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. Okay. Yes, I have just 2 short questions. The first one is that, and this goes to all the panelists, is that how do we solve societal corruption when it becomes so entrenched, not only in government, but in every layer of society? Because what happens over time is that the leadership tends to infuse the state with certain ways that it works, whatever the state is at the current time. And then the state tends to take those behaviors down to the society, so that you have it coming all the way through to the point where the psyche of the nation changes, so that the way that we rationalize things and the way that we think about things is now conducive to whatever corruption or whatever behaviors that we were taught by our leadership and then by the state, and then now it comes down to the people. When it becomes that bad, how do we change those behaviors that we deem as being corrupt, for example? The second one, and I think this, I took this from Brian's presentation about the private sector and multinationals, is that about 10 to 15 years ago, African countries began developing these visions, these 20-year-old visions, these 30-year-old visions. What happened, if you look at most of these visions, is that they have very big flagship projects where they want to build very big airports, or they want to build trains and things like that. And most of the African population sort of welcomed these big projects because they thought that they would make our lives easier. But we have come to realize that a lot of these big projects have become avenues by which a lot of these deals between private sector, even civil society as well, and the government, where a lot of this grand larceny, as you're calling it, takes place. How can we begin to think about these visions that we have, so that my sense is that we are missing the details of how corruption begins to happen, because we are only talking about it in terms of its effects. But there's a point at which it begins with our visions, with our strategies. How can we attack it from that end? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Number 3, please.
Boa tarde. Eu irei falar em português. Boa tarde mais uma vez. Chamo-me Julina Arcolete, sou consultora e venho de Moçambique. Escutei atentamente o que os painelistas tiveram a debruçar em termos da corrupção e principalmente aquilo que disse o senhor Vítor Paleda. Cheguei à conclusão de que o nosso governo africano, principalmente o meu país, tem dificuldade e não tem vontade política para combater a corrupção. Se formos a ver nos últimos anos as estatísticas que indicam, a maioria dos países africanos, a corrupção tende a subir. E há um setor que é mais abrangido, que é o setor de saúde. Eu cheguei à conclusão também que muitos de nós, ou nos nossos países, temos medo de transparência. Senhores, para mim a transparência não é uma ameaça. A transparência deve ser vista de forma positiva. Eu conheço gente, conheço colegas e conheço instituições em Moçambique que têm visto a transparência como uma ameaça. E eu penso que este cenário deve mudar. Devemos ter outra percepção, principalmente em relação à transparência. Sim, cheguei à conclusão também de que temos alguns países dentro do continente africano que têm os níveis de corrupção muito baixos e penso que isto devia ser replicado tanto para reforçar a advocacia como também para combater a corrupção. Podemos usar também alguns segredos de países da Europa e alguns dos países africanos, em Botsuana, por exemplo, já que estamos aqui em Botsuana, e pedirmos por emprestado aquilo que é feito ou qual é a experiência que eles têm para terem um nível de corrupção neste limite onde está. Eu penso que quanto maior ou quanto menor for o nível de corrupção, maior é a qualidade de vida. Basta para isso estabelecer boas práticas de governo, embora exija muitos anos de trabalho e, acima de tudo, vontade política. Portanto, volto a sublinhar que se não houver vontade política, dificilmente iremos combater a corrupção. E isto serve para os dois lados, já que estamos sempre a falar de igualdade de género e igualdade de direitos. Se tivermos num continente tanto um presidente ou uma presidente, se não houver vontade política, meus colegas, nós não iremos combater a corrupção. Muito obrigada.
Number 4. It's 4. I will speak by Arabic.
Sorry?
S'il vous plaît.
Number 4 now.
Now, okay.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay, I will speak by Arabic.
Encore là-bas.
My name is Ibrahim Ali. Ibrahim Ali, رئيس جمعية الشفافية الليبية. أنا أريد أن أقول في معظم دراساتنا التي قمنا بها أن أغلب النهب الممنهج في الثروات الأفريقية في الدول الأفريقية يكون عن طريق الجريمة المنظمة عبر الوطنية. فأريد أن أقول ما هي التدابير الواقعية التي سوف نتخذها في حد من هذه المخاطر الجريمة المنظمة عبر الوطنية في ظل لا يمكن قضاء الفساد في ظل وجود الجريمة المنظمة عبر الوطنية. فأريد أن يكون أحد التوصيات الوضع الأساس السليمة في مكافحة الجريمة المنظمة عبر الوطنية. شكرا.
Thank you very much. My name is Abimbola Aladejari from Nigeria. I want to give a comment and a question. I'm really excited that Botswana is going back to rebuilding African values by including anti-corruption in the curriculum in the primary school. I totally believe that the idea is a sustainable approach that can yield up to 50% of results in the fight against corruption in Africa. Because, of course, the majority of today's adults are already corrupt. And you know, it is difficult to bend a dry fish. And I can see from my intervention with young people that young people in the African continent are already seeing corruption as a norm and integrity as being outdated. So one question that young people kept asking us during our equipping in-school youth against corrupt practices using Catch Them Young and Family Plus School approach is that we do not see a lot of corrupt leaders in jail. Rather, we see them being given awards, you know, and being respected in religious centers and the likes. And my question is, in situations or in countries where the institutions, the bodies, the agencies that are supposed to uphold integrity are corrupt themselves, how easy is it for young people, especially a young person who goes there to report corruption cases, but his or her life is threatening and is in danger? To me, it makes it very difficult for young people because the atmosphere, the institutions and the legislations does not support young people, you know, coming out to speak out against corruption. So what can we do in such situations? Thank you.
Next person, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Nyewe Paul Ntena from Kingdom of Lesotho. I have two brief questions here for Mr. Victor. Mr. Victor, don't you think it's high time that our anti-corruption agencies should report directly to Parliament instead of executives? I'm bringing this submission because we have a trend where this anti-agency seems to be working hard on oppositions and activists, but not effectively on executives. Don't you think it's high time that we need to ensure that the agencies do report direct to Parliament? And on Mr. Brian, don't you think it's high time that, my question is, how do you think we can bring the culture of fear? Because we have a catastrophe where now our politicians are moving from stealing to looting our resources from Africa to other continents. Thank you.
Je remercie tous les panélistes pour la passion qu'ils nous communiquent dans leur communication. Je suis Satou Kane Kofi de la Côte d'Ivoire et j'aimerais avoir quelques informations sur l'engagement des institutions et l'engagement des mairies et des collectivités dont a parlé Monsieur le directeur du Botswana. Je voudrais savoir quelle action concrète la direction a pu mener pour pouvoir engager ces institutions, sachant qu'elles sont élues. Et la plupart du temps, les gens voient la lutte contre la corruption comme un délit, comme une folie. Alors, comment vous avez réussi à les intéresser et à s'impliquer, à les engager? Et quels sont les défis et les obstacles que vous avez dû rencontrer et comment vous les avez contournés? Merci.
Je suis Rida Radiendra Kumar de l'île Maurice. Je souhaite soulever des points très pertinents par rapport à 4 points que j'avais soulevés hier. Ayant une expérience comme observateur des élections en Afrique, on a noté que durant les campagnes électorales, il y a des activistes politiques qui soutiennent leurs candidats de leur parti respectif. Et après que leurs candidats sont élus, ils deviennent ministres ou parlementaires, ces agents activistes politiques se comportent comme les agents entre l'élu et les citoyens et ils agissent comme intermédiaires pour avoir l'accès à l'emploi ou d'autres privilèges de ressources à l'État. Ils fréquentent les couloirs des ministres. Et ces gens-là, les Nations Unies les définissent comme les political dons. Ces gens-là, ils agissent comme intermédiaires entre les corrompus et les corrupteurs. Donc, quel mécanisme de surveillance par rapport à cette catégorie de gens qui agissent comme des intermédiaires politiques très dangereuses dans la lutte contre la corruption? Et le deuxième point, on a parlé beaucoup de la corruption et les droits humains. Cette année, nous célébrons le 70e anniversaire de la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme. c'est-à-dire pas de domination de l'homme par l'homme. Et les Nations Unies nous interpellent et disent qu'il y a 1,3 milliard d'habitants sur Terre qui nous disent les droits de l'homme, c'est quoi 70 ans après. Quelle est la corrélation entre la corruption et la violation des droits fondamentaux de ce 1,3 milliard d'habitants sur Terre qui nous disent en 2018, mais les droits de l'homme, c'est quoi? Est-ce que la corruption, l'argent mal utilisé n'est pas responsable pour que 1,3 milliard d'habitants sur Terre nous disent le droit de l'homme, c'est quoi? Est-ce que le continent africain, le 20 décembre cette année, on pourrait dire, si on veut respecter les droits de l'homme, il faut abattre le monstre qui est la corruption? Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Timon Katlulo. I think I've already been introduced that I'm a senior citizen. I'll just like to ask a question and put it more rhetorically. At least in as far as I'm aware, the debate on combating corruption intensified in the early 2000s. That is when we saw the mushrooming of a number of conventions. But I'm wondering, in terms of priority, or in order of priority, whether we have actually asked ourselves a question, and that is the question that I'm going to put forward here. What is, I mean, first and foremost, what is the objective? What are the reasons for combating corruption? Because I believe that if we can answer that question more positively, then we should be able to channel the fight against corruption more directly and in a more pragmatic way to address the real reasons for combating corruption. Are we combating corruption for sustainable development, good governance, or the intention is to send people to prison? This is the question that I'm asking. Thank you, sir. But on a final note, let me say to Victor that, Ra, we applaud your approach of a small fish or big fish. What you are saying is that fish is fish. They all belong to the same biological family. So let us continue with the fight, whether it's a small fish or big fish. Thank you.
Bonjour, je suis Miguel Hueto, je viens du Bénin. Nous parlons là de l'approche durable pour la lutte contre la corruption. Je voudrais déjà faire remarquer que nos parlements dans tous nos pays sont devenus aujourd'hui un refuge pour ces personnes-là qui détournent nos ressources. Et cela appelle à outiller la population vraiment pour qu'au moment opportun, elles puissent sanctionner et éviter que ces personnes ne se retrouvent à bénéficier de l'immunité parlementaire. Ça, c'est mon premier point. Ensuite, oui, nous parlons de sanctions. Il faut sanctionner, nous avons des textes, il faut envoyer ces personnes-là qui sont auteurs ou victimes de corruption, il faut les envoyer en prison. Mais je mène une réflexion à savoir que quand, par exemple, nous envoyons les gens en prison, oui, c'est une mesure dissuasive pour les autres qui regardent, qui observent. Mais cela a également d'autres impacts dans la société. Parce que ces personnes, quand elles vont là-bas, étant donné qu'elles ont de l'argent, c'est elles qui se retrouvent également à corrompre au sein de nos prisons, de nos administrations pénitentiaires. Et elles sont mieux loties que la plupart de nos prisonniers sous nos cieux. Premier point. Second point, c'est que ces personnes qui se retrouvent en prison pour faute de corruption ou pour faute de détournement quelque part, laissent leur famille. Et quand les enfants, quand les femmes, donc ces deux catégories de personnes n'ont plus d'appui dans la société, ça crée d'autres problèmes à l'État. Vous allez voir que certains enfants vont devenir des bandits, vont créer l'insécurité aux autres membres de la société. Et ça, c'est le second point. Et pour finir, je voudrais dire que oui, nous pouvons, pour l'instant, on ne peut pas changer les adultes qui font ces gens, qui mettent en œuvre cette mauvaise pratique. On ne peut pas les changer. Mais je pense que c'est mieux, ce sera plus bénéfique. Pendant que nous travaillons à les mettre en prison actuellement et les années à venir, je pense que nous gagnerons beaucoup par former une nouvelle élite, à conscientiser la nouvelle génération et à faire en sorte que la génération de citoyens dont regorgera l'Afrique dans 10, dans 15, dans 20 ans puisse concevoir sans réflexion que être intègre et agir de façon intègre dans la société avec transparence, c'est une valeur que nous devons cultiver. Et je pense que c'est peut-être une alternative pour que demain, nos ressources soient destinées à développer l'Afrique et à préserver et à promouvoir les droits humains. Merci.
Okay. I think that's the last person now.
Mamadou.
Good afternoon.
Mamadou Koulibaly du Mali. Alors, pour paraphraser un peu la dame qui demandait ce matin pourquoi il n'y a pas assez de dames dans le panel, j'aurais bien aimé également qu'il y ait beaucoup plus de panélistes francophones. Je viens de cette zone et on a, dans cette zone, pris l'habitude de s'accommoder avec la corruption. On a tellement côtoyé la corruption que c'est devenu culturel. On parle depuis de corruption, on a cité des exemples qui, pour la plupart, sont des pays anglophones. J'aurais bien aimé qu'il y ait des exemples ici francophones, mais vous trouverez qu'il y en a rarement. Le cas du Botswana, le cas du Rwanda et le cas du Kenya sont très beaux. Nous apprécions ce qui a été fait et nous disons que cela part également de la maturité de la population. Aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Il faut obligatoirement changer de paradigme dans certains pays. On a grandi avec, tout le monde vole, et celui qui ne s'y adonne pas est considéré dans certaines sociétés comme quelqu'un qui est victime peut-être d'une malédiction, parce que la personne ne s'adonne pas seulement à la corruption. Changer de paradigme, c'est également aujourd'hui se baser sur de nouveaux acteurs pour pouvoir lutter contre cette corruption-là. Et ces nouveaux acteurs peuvent être les médias et la société civile. Il faut renforcer leurs capacités. Quand une population ne sait pas elle-même qu'elle s'adonne à une corruption qui peut freiner le développement du pays, ça devient compliqué. Donc il faut passer par l'éducation pour pouvoir rééduquer la population à faire la différence et à mieux maîtriser ce qui est corrompu ou ce qui ne l'est pas. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting questions. And maybe because you were the last person to answer the question, I'll just to let you know that our Honorable Commissioner for Political Affairs at the African Union is Francophone. And she's leading this entire process. But also, just to let you know that there are case studies of, there's been a media case study around the corruption that was going on in DR Congo, also the case in Mali, in Togo, and all that. And we're not going into details, but we're mentioning them so that you understand that it's not a one-sided problem, and we don't have one-sided cases. There are several, it's cutting across the continent, and that's why we're sitting here, to deal with it and to address it. I'll just quickly ask, excuse me? I'll quickly ask our panelists to please respond in 3 minutes each, and then we'll take another round and then close up this session so that we don't stand between you and lunch. Yeah? Yeah. So, Crystal, do you mind starting?
Thank you. So I'll start with Honorable Joanna, talking about parliamentarians and oversight. And I think we have to be, as Africans, we have to be audacious enough to disrupt global systems that don't work for us. And this means creating our own systems, creating our own solutions. A good example is the African Parliamentarians Network on Illicit Financial Flows and Tax. And they're a grouping of African MPs who come together to get trained, to understand, to come up with solutions. ATAF were also in the house. They come up with retrofit models specific for Africa that are meant specifically for us to tackle our problems when it comes to illicit financial flows and the fight therein. So I think we can't use, as Audre Lorde says, we can't use a master's tools to dismantle a master's house. And so we have to create new ones, but it also means for us to understand the system. Pablo Picasso says, learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. So I hope our African parliamentarians will begin that process of breaking, graciously breaking models that don't work for us and providing the oversight that we need, backed by evidence and knowledge that is so badly needed. Kagwe, how do we solve societal corruption when it's so entrenched? And I agree. I come from Kenya. We've sort of normalized corruption, and there's one scandal after another on the newspapers, and it sort of goes over your head. And even for me, I can't tangibly understand what $100 billion is. But I think with the incumbents of PPP as models of development that our governments more and more are taking towards, and what that means for corruption models to enter our countries, I think begs the question to begin to link, and this is what I constantly go back to, is linking struggles around debt, around corruption, around PPPs. A few years ago, I was in Ethiopia in the north, in Aksum, and I wondered why they were paving the roads with cobblestones in the 21st century when we have tarmac, coming from a country where we take all these debts and loans to build all these mega infrastructure highways. And it's a way of exogenous financing your own development and infrastructure. They used local workers to build the road, local materials, and they didn't go anywhere looking for loans. And I think we have to be bold enough to not limit our dreams of our 20, 30-year plans, of our structural transformation 2063. I think we just need to do it with a bit more creativity in how we finance it, how we resource it, and what works for us, rather. Moody's just declared that Kenya's SGR, which is 6% of Kenya's GDP, is at risk for loss. And these are things that we need to think about. Who are we developing for, and what are these mega infrastructure development projects for? Is it just for owners of capital, or are we developing for citizens? And once we begin to ask these questions, what are we developing for, I think we begin to move forward. It also links to the question from Botswana on what are the reasons for combating corruption. And I think sometimes we over-theorize sometimes, and for me, sitting from, listening to all the stories of the network that I work with, it's really just about dignity. It's about citizens of this continent being happy and living lives of dignity, devoid of all the jargon and the buzzwords. At the very end of the day, that's what we're looking for. I think that's all. There was questions and comments on primary school and education, and I think we've got a really good example in the audience today. Rob Tell, who's from Liberia, who's working on a children's book on corruption and really changing the dynamics of language and calling it names in our ethnic group, in our ethnic languages. If anyone here can tell me what corruption is in their own language, that would be interesting, because usually it's theft, it's trickery, it's all those things. And Rob Tell is creating a book, and there she is coming in. She's creating a book for children, calling it Baba, which is a Liberian language, and really just entrenching an idea of what corruption is and naming it as theft to children as they grow up, so they can begin to have that understanding removed from the very sometimes abstract idea of what corruption is in our societies.
Thank you, Crystal. Victor?
Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank the audience for the questions that they asked and the comments that they made. I will just go straight to those that affect me. The lady from Zimbabwe, a member of parliament, how do our parliament help in fighting corruption? I think I saw somebody here from Botswana Parliament. I don't know if they're still here. Maybe they can answer that better. But from the context of DCC, when we have major cases, sometimes there's a parliamentary oversight committee. They will actually make an inquiry without necessarily affecting the investigation, because we investigate with the intention to take to court. So long as they do their thing, so that they can actually make a bigger recommendation, maybe to government. They do that in this country. How effective? I think maybe that will be another argument for the day. And then IGAD, gentlemen, how do we solve societal corruption when this so entrenched and becomes accepted behavior? It's really difficult, my brother. That's why I mentioned the issue of complexity. And when I mention complexity, I can borrow from Professor Peter Senge. Professor Peter Senge is the author of the book called The Fifth Discipline. And this fifth discipline that he talks about is the systems thinking. So he says systemic problems need systemic solutions. So I think it's a systemic problem. It needs a systemic solution. And the how part is the most difficult part. And maybe Brian will use his Pan-Africanist tricks to actually answer you. And one of those, it will be issue of actually going back to our tradition. I'm also a history student. My first degree was in Bachelor of Arts, History and Environmental Science. And one of the things that I've left was to look into the issue of development and underdevelopment of Africa by Europe. And when I was looking into the kingdoms and empires that were successful in Africa, I tried to look for the ways of corruption. It was very difficult for me to actually try to look into the African context, because the king and the king, everything that they were doing it for the community, and the community have to be grateful for that. And they will crush viciously any other kind of attempt on uprising in terms of the society trying to be corrupt. So the kings that time didn't allow the people to be corrupt. So at least maybe they were corrupt in their own sense, but they made sure that they controlled corruption within purpose. They were giving. And then the issue of combating organized crime at national level, how to address it. I think the simple answer for me, as a former police officer, for you to actually understand transnational organized crime is actually to understand the root causes, who benefits, how does it actually operate. If you do that, you can actually crush it. Yeah. But normally in the police cycles, when there is a problem, the most important thing is for you to react when you don't prevent. So I used to work with police officers. When the people started robbing with more guns, they say, no, go and buy more guns. And then when they come with the more guns, they say, no more guns. Buy now high-powered caliber. You don't just buy guns. Now you buy the ones with bigger bullets. But that's not the problem. I think the issue of transnational organized crime is that who's behind it, how does it see? So it still goes to Peter Senge's systems thinking. You need to be systemic. And then the Lesotho guy, my brother, and I agree, yes. I think we need to, it's high time we start reporting to Parliament. Whether it will work or it will not work, I'm not too sure, because at the end of the day, it's an issue about leadership. It also circles around the issue of independence. People are always asking me, how independent are you? What's the tenure of your office? I say, in Botswana, it's safe to say anything that you want. They might find something else maybe to throw you out, but I've not seen it, I've not experienced it. The most important thing is, even if they write to me a paper and say, here's the paper, you are independent, the issue is, will that make me actually executing my mandate? So there's two different. So I think independence is an issue of what kind of heart do you have? Do you have a heart of a lion? Can you execute? Because they might give you your independence, but you might not even execute. So it's debatable. We can go on and on. The lady who was speaking French, I forgot what he says from. He was asking the question, how did we make ministries and other agencies join DCC in the fight against corruption when elsewhere fighting corruption is seen as madness? My dear sister, I didn't want to bore these people about detail, because fighting corruption is not only dangerous, it's also boring. It's a boring job. It's not as exciting as others, like flying aeroplanes or doing other things. It's a boring job. But one of the details that I can give you, in this country, there is a high-level a committee that is chaired by the president. And all the ministries, including the ministers, they've got what is called performance indicator. They'll report on poverty eradication. And one of those indicators is corruption. So it automatically forces the ministers and the ministries to report to the president, what did they do about corruption? And my committee, my deputy, sits in that committee to make sure that he gives them feedback. So every ministry have to tell the president, what have they done about corruption in their ministry? So that's why, so it's a tie. So they don't have an excuse, because they have to report something, and it's measured in percentage. They have to report to the president what they're doing. So that's how we force them, because they don't want to do it. If it's a burning platform to you, it's not their burning platform. That's why we put it as a performance indicator. And then the last one is no, that one the moderator answered. It was the Francophone one. I just wanted to say no, but the commissioner here is from the Francophone.
Chair, the generality of African intellectuals and middle class in this room know that Japan, in order to develop, engaged in acts that we can now classify as corruption with respect to Western technology. That China, in order to develop, engaged in similar acts in terms of their ability to photocopy Western technology. So I want us to have a nuanced conversation about corruption and its impact on development. That's one. And I said that African thieves have become Pan-Africanists. But we know from Nigeria and Angola and elsewhere that they've also become philanthropists. And they've become rock stars, right? So in a sense, when you want to link that to what rights are violated by corruption, you have to remember what President Museveni said in response to something that I think either myself or someone had said. He said, look, transparency is not the same as nakedness. One of the biggest acts of corruption is that when we are discussing an African strategy to fight corruption, we never have a uniquely African space. And I know that that's because we have northern supporters and so on and so forth. So one of the most corrupting influences is all of us are sounding proper and appropriate because we always have our donors in the room. It's like discussing sex with your wife and your father-in-law and mother-in-law in the room. I mean, it's a real challenge. We need to create a space for African dialogue when we can be very candid with each other. Otherwise, we are having a political beauty pageant. Because no country will say we're very corrupt, unless if it's a member of civil society. Otherwise, governments will say we've done everything proper, we've set up the right institution. If we're looking for sustainable mechanisms, Chair, let's start with the following. The issue of the state and the nature of the state is important. We have been fighting corruption in an ideological and ethical vacuum. And that's why we have prescriptions that says, well, what we need to do is to start teaching children ethics from the beginning. What do you think? You think these adults were taught corruption from the beginning? No, they were taught ethics. Ask them. They are just corrupt by choice. So consciousness does not grow because of absence or presence of curriculum. So we need to ask a more fundamental question about how political and social consciousness happens in society. Otherwise, we are going to write many curriculums thinking, look, the priests that are abusing boys in some of these religious institutions, you think they were not taught the Bible and taught how to respect human dignity? They were. They made choice because the cost of compliance is the same as the cost of non-compliance. And because the cost is the same, human beings will tilt towards deviance because there's no cost for non-compliance. So colleagues, I'm not saying don't do curricula, but don't think you are inventing anything new. Every single person who went to a mission school or went to a government school who is more than 40 years old in this room was taught ethics, integrity, accountability. When they grew up, they said, if you are not ethical when you are young, then you are treacherous. If you are still ethical when you are in government, then you are a fool. And it is reversing that notion that ethics is foolishness that will create a new consciousness. The next one is youthism. You know, I'm a big supporter of youth. From the beginning of this platform, Ibrahim will tell you. So you will forgive me now for addressing this youthism. Oh, you're no young people. You are not going to be young forever. Young is a temporary condition. You are going to be old very soon, some of you, right? And if you know that, neither your status of youth or oldness defines your consciousness. Consciousness is separate from your age. And that's why it's not accurate to say young people are less corrupt, older people are more corrupt. The fact is, if society is contaminated, we breathe the same air. Youth have a very complex relationship with celebrity and with wealth. You get one of those people who's always abusing women in their songs and singing about women's anatomy. The young people in this room will dance like they have no middle line. And because they are committed to that sort of things. If you don't fight corruption in language, if you don't fight corruption in gestures, how do you think you are going to fight it in money? So the fact of the matter is, let's build a consciousness that's not purely anchored on youthism. In fact, when Ambassador Bankole from Nigeria, when he first met me, I was almost youth. I was just exiting youth. And he'll tell you, we used to talk about, include more youth, include more youth. And we said there are some young people with very old ideas and habits. And there are some old people with very young ideas and habits. It is not the age of a body that we're including. It's the consciousness and deliberate understanding of the imperative of Pan-Africanism that we want to include. Otherwise, we'll include an anti-African young body. So which rights are violated? The first right is the right to development. The right to development. I know that you all want to talk about the right to health and so on. The right to development. Africa's arrested development cannot be divorced from illicit financial flows. It cannot be divorced from the inequitable international trade regimes. It cannot be divorced from the inequitable investment climate. It cannot be divorced from the fact that 98% of African wealth is owned by foreigners. And global rules have been made that make it impossible for Africans to engage in any form of distribution and redistribution. So we have now mounted struggles on how to share revenue from that which will be permanently foreign owned. And this is the real frontier for struggle for young people. When we are old, of course, we have to talk about how to manage sustainably. When you are young, you can talk about ownership. Because if you enter your future without ownership of African resources, there is no amount of ethics which will cure your poverty. You are poor because of dispossession on this continent. I want to suggest to you that the next right is the right to the commons, the public goods. Our governments are giving away land. We are giving away water resources. We are giving away minerals. I keep asking myself, the day Agenda 2063 happens, what will be left for those who will be youth in that generation? There will be nothing. So those commons are a platform for struggle for young people. What are those things that are public goods for which we must fight? That right to public goods is one of the most fundamental. We're not fighting for Africa's natural resources purely because we want more rents and equitable rents. We're fighting for Africa's natural resources and commons because what is a people without their land? What is land without the consciousness of being? What is the consciousness of being if you are a mere echo that barks at those that owns your very being? Your soul is a mere echo. You speak French, English, and you fight over French and English, right? Partly because the first act of imperialism was to make you a vacuous soul without any indigenous language. So we will not have any complaint about is there Swahili, Shona, or Zulu, but we will fight over English and French and Portuguese and co. Dear people, what we have become is poor versions of Europe. That's why Europe uses European lens to determine whether we are ethical versions of poor Europe. Unless we change this narrative, we cannot call this an African space. This is a space of Eurocentric origin in which Africans are gathering to talk about Eurocentric values, about how to become more ethical, more humane, more respected globally. Lastly, Chair, lest you kick me from this stage. I hear a lot about discipline and punishment and stuff. Do you know that we've been imprisoning people who rape women for many years, and violence against women has not dissipated? The imprisonment of leaders is important, but often is not enough. It's the consciousness of society. It's the mobilization of society. It's building a mass movement against the looting of our continent by international players and their local compradors until we deal with that fact that the miniature junior managers of international looting syndicates are part of what informs the true organized crime against Africa, is embedded in international trade rules, in international investment rules, and in all sorts of rules. And because as Africans we like to divide ourselves around these phonies, francophone, anglophone, and so on and so forth, we have not learned to speak with one voice. Even when we pretend to speak with one voice, we have puppet masters that are dividing us. You cannot fight the corruption against Africa until you determine that you are Africans. As long as you want to be little Botswana, little Lesotho, tiny Zimbabwe, or they even have a minister of finance in Zimbabwe when there's no finance. But you can do these things, you know. If you want to be these things, then your value to Africa's future is minimal, Chair. So corruption first is the corruption of the mind. Corruption second is the corruption of the conscience. Corruption third then manifests as the corrupted conscience and mind acting by taking resources, like a mother who would take milk from her own baby, not because she is thirsty, but simply because greed cannot help itself. It will eat even when there's no need.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks, everyone. Yeah, my apologies. I think it's 1:36 now. We're supposed to go for lunch. We were supposed to be at lunch 6 minutes ago, but I think, Ibrahim, we can take 10 more here. Why did you guys say no? Okay, so we want to thank all of you. Before our panelists will leave, I just thought that it's important to bring home everything that has been said together. The first thing is for us to understand that we need to ensure that we continue to empower and educate our people about corruption so that there's a clear understanding, and then that helps them to take a people-centered approach to fight corruption. Second is that we need to think about how we improve coordination amongst agencies. And we saw that case study from Victor in Botswana here. A third is that we need to deal with political capture. So we see where corrupt officials from multinational agencies and all that, they just take over the state and hold the government to ransom because of corruption. So we need to look beyond our nose from the small fish to the big fish, because the small fish is able to actually do what it does because there's support, from the higher level political class. And then we need to take a strategic approach, an approach that ensures that we're dealing with the underlying causes rather than the effects of corruption or the byproducts of corruption. We need to consider how we empower our parliaments. That means our parliaments should no longer be toothless bulldogs. They should be able to act and hold our officials and, of course, the entire public to account, because they are a representative of the public. We need to look at the nature of the state, and I think that's one of the big issues that we need to consider in our fight against corruption. We need to look at it from an African perspective, not from a Eurocentric or a Western-centric perspective. And we need to start fighting corruption, not from the point of money, but from the mind. And we need to build a political and social consciousness that helps people to understand that, we are fighting corruption from the root cause, from the fact that, we want to see change, a sustainable change. And if we want to see a sustainable change, then we need to deal with this. Let me give a very quick example. I remember when the Panama Papers leaked, the Shell company was saying that as far as Nigeria is concerned, they have officials that they are paying in all the ministries, you know, to ensure that they get enough information, they can change policies, they can twist policies, they can determine contracts and even impact on national budgets. You know, that's how deep it is. So corruption is not just about us, it's also about those external bodies who actually, you know, strengthen and perpetuate it, from contracting to deals to production sharing contracts. So it starts with not just the money, but the mind, and building a set of people who can help them perpetuate corruption. I think that's why Brian was talking about we need to deal with corruption from a mindset in the first place. I think those are the key issues, and I hope that if you do have more questions or comments, you will continue to have those discussions over lunch. And remember, finally, one thing: if you want a lizard in your house, it is impossible to be a crocodile outside. Thank you for listening.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, shall we put hands once more for this brilliant panel? Brian Kagoro, Mr. Bruno Victor Paledi, Apollo Nwafo, and of course, Crystal Simeone. Thank you very much. Before we go for lunch, a few announcements we'd like to make. I think the first one actually also speaks to me. Because of our colleagues who are helping with interpretation, we've been advised that we should keep the pace of our interventions and our presentations for the speakers to a manageable level so that it gives them the buffer time to interpret simultaneously. I hope we all take note of that. We got a very strange complaint that a few of our colleagues who have tried to access lunch and tea breaks were turned back because they were told they have to pay for it or something like that. Let's state very clearly, transparently, that there is nothing like that. Teas and lunches are free, and we've already distributed tags for the lunch. If you do not have one, the Secretariat is available just at the back to hand it to you. For all our sponsored participants, we kindly request that you approach any of the colleagues at the Secretariat. The Secretariat is on your left side, just at the end of this room. Please, when you go there, provide your boarding passes as a proof of travel. We would like to do that as part of our own accountability measures to the Commission. For colleagues who have layovers through Johannesburg for more than 10 hours, they should also see Magda at the Secretariat for issues relating to their accommodation to cater for the layover. One of our participants, Madam Munjo Bukavu, please kindly see any of the colleagues from the Secretariat. We have an important information for you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at your program, the session that we'll be having immediately after lunch speaks to one of the very important points that has emerged from this last session. And it's the one that is talking about building collective consciousness. And that is why, if you look at the formation of this room, we decided to bring together people from diverse backgrounds and diverse sectors within the African society so that we can have this collective approach to the fight against corruption. And I'm sure that that particular session would also bring very important insights to life as we discuss this very important topic. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time for lunch. Enjoy lunch, and we see you at exactly 2:30. Thank you very much.
DJ